In the grand halls of Camelot, where torchlight danced across stone walls and the round table bore witness to oaths of brotherhood, there lived a knight whose name would echo through the centuries. His sword arm was unmatched, his courage legendary, his loyalty absolute. Yet this same knight would bring about the destruction of everything he held dear. This is the story of Sir Lancelot du Lac, the greatest knight who ever lived, and the man whose love would shatter a kingdom. The tale of Lancelot stands as one of the most profound explorations of human weakness and nobility in all of Western literature. Here was a man who embodied every virtue a knight could possess, yet carried within him a fatal flaw that would prove stronger than all his strength, more powerful than all his skill. His story reminds us that even the mightiest among us remain vulnerable to the pull of passion, that honor and desire can wage war within a single heart, and that sometimes our greatest loves become our deepest betrayals. When we speak of Arthurian legend, certain names rise immediately to mind. Arthur himself, the once and future king; Merlin, the wizard whose prophecies shaped destinies; Guinevere, the queen whose beauty was matched only by her tragedy; and Lancelot, whose very name became synonymous with the contradictions of medieval chivalry. He was both savior and destroyer, loyal friend and ultimate betrayer, the purest knight and the most fallen. Understanding Lancelot means understanding the heart of the Arthurian world, where idealism constantly collided with human nature, where dreams of perfect kingdoms foundered on the rocks of mortal weakness. Our story begins not in Camelot, but in the war-torn lands of Gaul, in a kingdom called Benwick. Here ruled King Ban, a noble monarch and ally of the young King Arthur across the sea. Ban's kingdom prospered, his people flourished, and his marriage to Queen Elaine brought him joy. When a son was born to them, they named him Galahad, though this name would not follow him into legend. The child was beautiful beyond measure, with eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom even in infancy. But peace in Benwick was not to last. King Claudius, a neighboring lord, consumed by ambition and jealousy, launched a brutal campaign against Ban's kingdom. His armies were vast, his tactics merciless. One by one, Ban's castles fell. His knights died defending their homes. His people fled before the advancing enemy. Finally, King Ban and Queen Elaine found themselves fleeing from their last stronghold, the fortress of Trebes, with their infant son clutched in the queen's arms. The royal couple fled into the deep forest, seeking any refuge from their pursuers. King Ban, wounded and exhausted, climbed a small hill to look back one final time at his kingdom. There in the distance, he saw Trebes burning, flames reaching toward the heavens as if trying to consume the very sky. The sight was too much for his breaking heart. King Ban collapsed, his wounds and grief overwhelming him. He died there on that hillside, watching his life's work turn to ash. Queen Elaine, overcome with anguish, laid her husband's body gently on the ground and ran to a nearby lake, seeking water, or perhaps simply escape from the horror surrounding her. In her distraction, she placed her infant son on the shore. What happened next would change the course of legend itself. The waters of the lake began to shimmer and part. From their depths rose a figure of ethereal beauty, a woman whose very presence seemed to bend reality around her. This was the Lady of the Lake, a powerful enchantress whose nature straddled the boundary between mortal and fairy, between the world of men and the ancient realms of magic. The lady beheld the infant lying helpless on the shore, and she saw in him something extraordinary. Perhaps she glimpsed his future greatness, or perhaps she simply felt compassion for the orphan child. Whatever her motivation, she took the baby in her arms and descended back into the waters. Queen Elaine, returning from her grief-stricken wandering, found only empty shore, her husband dead, her kingdom destroyed, her son vanished. History does not record what became of her, though some tales suggest she spent her remaining days in a convent, praying for the child she would never see again. Beneath the lake existed a realm beyond mortal understanding. Here, the Lady of the Lake ruled over a court of beauty and magic. Time moved differently in this underwater kingdom. What seemed like days might be years in the world above, or years might pass as swiftly as heartbeats. The lady raised the boy she had claimed, teaching him arts both martial and mystical. She renamed him Lancelot, though the meaning of this name remains debated by scholars to this day. Some say it derives from old words meaning servant or lance, while others trace it to Celtic legends of light and lakes. Under the lady's tutelage, Lancelot grew into something remarkable. She trained him in swordsmanship until he could move faster than the eye could follow, his blade seeming to be in 3 places at once. She taught him the code of chivalry, drilling into him the virtues a true knight must embody: courage, mercy, loyalty, humility, and devotion to protecting the weak. She educated him in arts and letters, so that he became not merely a warrior, but a cultured gentleman. She even gifted him with magical items: a ring that could break enchantments, a lance that never failed to strike true, and other wonders whose powers would aid him in adventures to come. But for all her teachings, the lady could not prepare Lancelot for one thing: the human heart and its capacity for both love and destruction. When Lancelot reached his 18th year, or perhaps his 15th, depending on which account you trust, the lady knew the time had come. She brought him to the surface world, dressed in gleaming silver armor atop a white horse, looking every inch the perfect knight. She took him to Camelot, to the court of the legendary King Arthur, and there she presented him to the king, asking that Arthur accept this youth as a knight in his service. King Arthur, looking upon the young man before him, saw immediately the quality that the Lady of the Lake had cultivated. There was something in Lancelot's bearing, a combination of confidence and humility, strength and gentleness, that marked him as exceptional. Arthur agreed to knight him that very evening, and the ceremony took place with all the solemnity such an occasion demanded. Lancelot knelt before Arthur, placed his hands between the king's, and swore the oath that would bind his fate to Camelot forever. He vowed to serve justice, to protect the innocent, to honor all women, to be loyal to his king, and to uphold the ideals of the Round Table. The following day, in the presence of the assembled court, Lancelot made another request. He asked to become Queen Guinevere's champion, to dedicate his sword and his service to her protection. This was not an unusual request. Queens often had champions, knights who served as their personal guardians and representatives. Guinevere, flattered by the devotion of this handsome young warrior, graciously accepted. Neither she nor Lancelot could have known in that moment that this oath would lead them both to ruin. From his very first quest, Lancelot proved himself worthy of the Lady of the Lake's training. He rode out to defend the Lady of No Hout, whose lands were under attack. He fought in tournaments and won victory after victory. He rescued prisoners from evil knights and freed castles from tyrannical lords. His reputation grew with astonishing speed. Knights who had served Arthur for years watched in amazement as this youth surpassed them all. Even Sir Gawain, long considered the greatest of Arthur's warriors, found himself eclipsed by the newcomer's prowess. What made Lancelot extraordinary was not merely his skill with weapons, though that was unmatched. It was the combination of abilities he possessed. In single combat, he had no equal. His strength allowed him to fight for hours without tiring. His speed made his attacks nearly impossible to defend against. His courage never wavered, no matter how dire the circumstances. But beyond these physical gifts, Lancelot possessed a keen intelligence and an unwavering commitment to the chivalric code. He fought not for glory or wealth, but because fighting was the right thing to do. He protected the weak because they needed protection. He showed mercy to defeated enemies because mercy was the mark of true nobility. One of his most famous early adventures became known as the Knight of the Cart episode. Queen Guinevere had been abducted by a treacherous knight named Melagant, who took her to his father's kingdom and held her prisoner. Arthur's court was thrown into chaos. The queen in danger, the king's honor at stake, and yet the distance to Melagant's castle was great. Knights prepared to ride to her rescue, but Lancelot had already departed, racing to save his queen. During his pursuit, Lancelot's horse collapsed beneath him, unable to continue at the punishing pace. Desperate, knowing every moment's delay meant more danger for Guinevere, Lancelot encountered a dwarf driving a crude cart. In the medieval world, riding in a cart was deeply shameful, something reserved for criminals and the condemned. For a knight to ride in such a conveyance would be a stain on his honor that might never wash clean. The dwarf offered Lancelot a choice, his pride or his queen's safety. Lancelot hesitated for only 2 steps, just 2 heartbeats of doubt. Then he leaped into the cart without another thought. His love for Guinevere was already so powerful that he would sacrifice his reputation, his standing, everything for her sake. He rode in that shameful cart all the way to Melagant's castle, enduring the mockery of those who saw him, accepting the humiliation because nothing mattered except reaching Guinevere. When he arrived at the castle, he challenged Melagant immediately. The battle was fierce, but the outcome was never in doubt. Lancelot fought with the fury of a man defending his heart's desire. He wounded Melagant grievously, and would have killed him had not the villain's father intervened and begged for peace. Guinevere was freed and returned safely to Camelot. From that day forward, Lancelot was sometimes called the Knight of the Cart, and though some might have meant it mockingly, he wore the title as a badge of honor. He had proven that love for his queen mattered more than any earthly shame. Arthur came to depend on Lancelot more and more. When threats arose against the kingdom, it was Lancelot the king sent to handle them. When tournaments needed a champion, Lancelot bore Camelot's banner. When injustice needed correcting, Lancelot's sword delivered justice. The bond between king and knight grew deep. They were not merely lord and vassal, but true friends. They hunted together, planned battles together, sat up late into the night, discussing philosophy and justice and the dream of a perfect kingdom. Arthur loved Lancelot like a brother, trusted him above all others, and believed that with knights like Lancelot at his side, Camelot would endure forever. But even as this friendship blossomed, another connection was forming, one far more dangerous. Lancelot and Guinevere, thrown together constantly by his role as her champion, began to see each other differently. Their conversations lingered longer. Their glances held meanings beyond words. They both tried to resist, to maintain proper boundaries, but the attraction between them was like gravity, pulling them inexorably together. Neither wanted to betray Arthur, whom they both loved in their own ways. But the human heart does not always obey the dictates of honor and duty. A love between Lancelot and Guinevere did not ignite suddenly like a spark to kindling. Rather, it grew slowly, insidiously, like a vine climbing a castle wall, beautiful and deadly at once. Every proper conversation contained an undercurrent of unspoken feelings. Every formal gesture of courtesy masked deeper emotions. They were trapped in the conventions of courtly love, that strange medieval institution where knights were expected to feel passionate devotion to noble ladies, often married ladies, and to express this devotion through service and poetry and great deeds. In the beginning, they could tell themselves they were merely following these conventions. Lancelot performed his quests in Guinevere's name, as was proper for her champion. She bestowed tokens of favor upon him, as was customary for a queen to do. They exchanged looks and words that could be interpreted innocently by those around them. But they both knew the truth. What had begun as conventional courtly devotion had transformed into something real, something consuming, something neither of them had the strength to resist. The exact moment when their love crossed from admiration into adultery is lost to the mists of legend. Different versions of the story tell it different ways. Some say it happened gradually, with increasing intimacy leading inevitably to ultimate betrayal. Others point to specific moments when resistance finally crumbled. But all agree that once the line was crossed, there was no going back. Lancelot and Guinevere became lovers, meeting in secret, stealing moments together while Arthur remained oblivious, building a relationship founded on deception and sustained by their willingness to betray the man they both claimed to love. For Lancelot, this affair created a torment beyond description. Every time he looked at Arthur's face, he saw the trust there, the friendship, the absolute faith that Lancelot would never hurt him. Every time he spoke with Arthur about honor and loyalty and the ideals of the Round Table, he tasted ashes in his mouth, knowing he was living a lie. Every time he held Guinevere in his arms, the joy was tainted by the knowledge of his betrayal. He was trapped between two absolute loyalties, his oath to his king and his love for his queen. He could not serve both, yet he could not abandon either. The internal conflict drove Lancelot to increasingly desperate attempts to prove his worthiness in other ways. He threw himself into ever more dangerous quests, as if by performing impossible deeds, he could somehow balance out his betrayal. He fought giants and dragons. He stormed impregnable fortresses. He defeated entire armies single-handedly. But no amount of heroism could wash away the stain on his soul. He knew himself to be the greatest knight in the world, yet also the most fraudulent. His entire life had become a contradiction, and the strain of maintaining this dual existence wore on him constantly. Guinevere suffered her own particular anguish. She loved Arthur in her way, respected him, valued him as king and husband. But Arthur's attention was always divided between her and his kingdom, between private affection and public duty. With Lancelot, she experienced a passion and devotion that Arthur could never provide. Lancelot loved her with single-minded intensity, would sacrifice anything for her, saw her not merely as a queen, but as the center of his entire world. It was intoxicating and terrifying at once. She knew their affair endangered everything, yet she could not bring herself to end it. The court, meanwhile, remained largely oblivious, or perhaps chose to remain so. Some knights surely suspected the truth, but none wanted to voice such terrible accusations. Arthur's dream of Camelot depended on the belief that his knights were noble and true, that his queen was virtuous, that the Round Table represented something pure and good in a dark world. To admit that his greatest knight and his own wife were betraying him would shatter that dream. So people looked away, made excuses, found other explanations for the time Lancelot and Guinevere spent together. The conspiracy of silence protected them all, allowing the affair to continue year after year. But there were those who did not look away, who saw the truth and were not willing to ignore it. Chief among these were Sir Agravain and Sir Mordred, both sons of King Lot and therefore Arthur's nephews. Agravain was driven by a rigid sense of honor that could not tolerate such flagrant violation of the king's trust. Mordred, however, had darker motivations. He was himself treacherous, ambitious, jealous of Arthur's power and Lancelot's glory. If he could expose the affair, he could destroy them both and perhaps claim power for himself. These two began to watch and wait, gathering evidence, biding their time until they could strike with devastating effectiveness. While Lancelot's attention remained consumed by Guinevere, another story was unfolding that would have profound consequences for his destiny. In the kingdom of Corbinic lived King Pelles, known also as the Fisher King, guardian of the Holy Grail itself. Pelles had received prophecies telling him that his daughter Elaine would bear a son to the greatest knight in the world, and that this son would be the one to achieve the Grail quest. When Lancelot arrived in Corbinic, having heard tales of a dragon terrorizing the region, Pelles knew the prophecy was about to be fulfilled. Lancelot fought the dragon with his customary valor, using his shield to deflect its fiery breath while stabbing with his sword until the beast lay dead. The grateful King Pelles held a feast in the hero's honor. During this feast, Pelles arranged through magic for his daughter Elaine to appear to Lancelot as Guinevere. The deception was complete and cruel. Lancelot, believing himself to be with his beloved queen, spent the night with Elaine. Only in the morning did the enchantment break, revealing the truth. Lancelot's reaction was one of absolute rage. He felt violated, tricked, used. He drew his sword, fully intending to kill Elaine for her part in the deception. Only when he learned she was pregnant with his child did he stay his hand. But he could not forgive her, could not even look at her without feeling the shame and anger of what had been done to him. He left Corbinic immediately, unable to bear staying near Elaine and the reminder of his unwitting infidelity to Guinevere. Elaine gave birth to a son 9 months later. Following King Pelles' instructions, she named the child Galahad, which had been Lancelot's own birth name, though he himself did not know this. The boy was placed in the care of nuns to be raised in purity and devotion. From his earliest days, Galahad was marked as someone special. He possessed his father's physical beauty and strength, but also a spiritual purity that Lancelot had long since lost. While Lancelot wrestled with sin and guilt, his son grew up innocent, untouched by the moral compromises that had corrupted his father. The deception at Corbinic had effects on Lancelot beyond mere anger. The episode triggered something in him, some breaking point that his strained psyche could no longer withstand. He began to suffer periods of madness, times when the weight of his contradictions became too much to bear. During one such episode, he fled Camelot entirely, disappearing into the wilderness. He lived for a time as a wild man, wandering forests and surviving on whatever he could find. His mind broke. Elaine found him during this period of madness and nursed him back to health. Her love for Lancelot remained constant despite his rejection of her. She tended him with devotion until his sanity returned. When he recovered and realized who had saved him, Lancelot felt some measure of gratitude, but still, he could not love Elaine as she loved him. His heart belonged entirely to Guinevere, leaving no room for anyone else. He returned to Camelot, leaving Elaine once more, though she would continue to love him until her dying day, a love that was pure and constant and utterly unrequited. Years passed. Galahad grew to manhood in his convent, trained by the nuns and visiting knights to be a warrior of exceptional skill. When he reached 18 years old, he was brought to Camelot during the Feast of Pentecost. An old knight led him directly to a specific chair at the round table, one that had remained empty for all the years of Arthur's reign. This was the Siege Perilous, the prowess seat, and it bore an inscription stating that only the knight destined to achieve the Holy Grail could sit there safely. Any other who attempted it would die instantly. Galahad sat down without hesitation, and the seat accepted him. The gathered knights gasped in amazement. Arthur immediately recognized this young man's significance and asked who he was. When Lancelot looked closely at the youth, he saw his own features reflected there and understood. This was his son, the child born from that night of deception at Corbenic. Lancelot felt a complex mixture of pride, shame, and something approaching awe. Here was proof that something good could come even from his failures. That same day, other portents appeared. A sword and a stone materialized near the castle, with an inscription saying only the greatest knight could draw it. Galahad pulled it free as easily as Arthur had once drawn Excalibur. Then, as the knights sat at dinner, the hall was filled with brilliant light. A vision of the Holy Grail appeared, floating above the round table, veiled in white cloth but radiant with divine power. Every man present felt waves of spiritual ecstasy wash over them. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the Grail vanished. The knights sat in stunned silence. Sir Gawain was the first to speak, jumping to his feet and declaring that he would embark on a quest to find the Grail and behold it unveiled. One by one, every knight of the Round Table made the same vow. Within days, they dispersed from Camelot, riding out in all directions to seek this holiest of relics. Arthur watched them go with a heavy heart, for he knew, somehow, that not all would return, that the quest for the Grail would break the Round Table as surely as any battle. Lancelot rode out with the others, driven by a desperate hope that perhaps achieving the Grail would redeem him, would wash away his sins and make him worthy once more. He undertook the quest with the same dedication he brought to all his endeavors, facing dangers and defeating enemies as he always had. But the Grail quest was different from ordinary adventures. This was not about martial prowess or courage. This was about spiritual purity, about the state of one's soul. Again and again, Lancelot found himself unable to progress. He would reach a chapel only to be barred from entering. He would come upon holy visions only to have them disappear before he could fully perceive them. Other knights told him of miracles they had witnessed, of tests they had passed, but Lancelot met only failure. The message was clear. His sins disqualified him from this particular quest. His adultery with Guinevere, his betrayal of Arthur, his willingness to place earthly love above divine duty, all of these rendered him unworthy of beholding the Grail. The repeated failures tormented Lancelot more than any physical wound ever had. He had spent his entire life being the best, the greatest, the champion of champions. Now he faced a challenge where all his skills meant nothing, where he was judged and found wanting. He met with a hermit who explained the harsh truth. Lancelot's love for Guinevere was not merely wrong because she was married to his king. It was wrong because it represented the elevation of earthly passion above heavenly devotion. Until Lancelot could place God above all earthly loves, he would never be pure enough for the Grail. While Lancelot struggled and failed, his son Galahad succeeded at every turn. Galahad moved through the quest as if divinely guided, because he was. He obtained a sacred shield marked with a red cross. He mended the sword of David, broken for generations. He passed tests that destroyed other knights. Together with Sir Percival and Sir Bors, Galahad traveled to the ends of the earth in pursuit of the Grail. Finally, in the holy city of Sarras, in a moment of transcendent spiritual ecstasy, Galahad beheld the Grail fully unveiled. He saw within it mysteries no mortal should perceive, and survived the experience because of his absolute purity. Galahad, having achieved the quest's goal, asked Joseph of Arimathea for one final blessing, the ability to choose the moment of his death. The request was granted. Shortly thereafter, Galahad decided his time had come. He had accomplished everything he was born to do. Angels descended from heaven and bore his soul upward, carrying him to eternal paradise. Sir Bors witnessed this miracle and survived to return to Camelot with news of what had transpired. Only 3 knights achieved the Grail quest: Galahad, Percival, and Bors. The rest, including Lancelot, failed. Lancelot did have one partial success. He reached Castle Corbinic, the castle where the Grail was kept, and came close to the room where it rested. Through the partly open door, he glimpsed the Grail and felt its power, but he could not enter the room itself. The best he could manage was this distant, incomplete vision. It was enough to give him hope of eventual redemption, but not enough to erase his sins. He returned to Camelot, humbled, knowing that his son had surpassed him, had achieved what Lancelot never could. It should have made him proud, and in some ways it did, but it also reinforced the fundamental truth he could no longer deny. He had failed the most important test of his life. When the knights returned from the Grail quest, many seats at the round table remained empty. Good men had died seeking spiritual perfection. Men like Galahad and Percival, who had achieved the quest, and many more who had fallen along the way. The fellowship was diminished, and the survivors bore scars, both physical and spiritual. The quest had changed them all, had forced them to confront their own unworthiness. But Lancelot returned to Camelot, determined to change nothing, to resume his affair with Guinevere, as if the quest had never happened. Guinevere welcomed him back desperately. She had spent the years of his absence in torment, never knowing if he lived or died, plagued by jealousy when she heard tales of other women Lancelot had encountered. The reunion of the lovers was passionate and reckless. They took fewer precautions than before, as if the intensity of their feelings made caution impossible. Or perhaps they had simply grown fatalistic, knowing their affair could not remain hidden forever, but unable to stop themselves. Agravain and Mordred watched and waited. They had long suspected the truth, but suspicion was not proof. They needed to catch Lancelot and Guinevere together, in circumstances that could not be explained away. They began to set traps, to arrange situations where the lovers might betray themselves. They recruited other knights to their cause, men who also believed that Lancelot's treachery needed to be exposed. Not all who joined them did so from pure motives. Some were jealous of Lancelot's glory. Others bore grudges over past slights, but all agreed that if the accusations were true, justice demanded action. The opportunity came one evening when Arthur was away hunting. Agravain and Mordred stationed armed knights near Guinevere's chambers. They knew Lancelot was with the queen, knew this was their chance. At their signal, the knights burst in, surrounding the door to Guinevere's inner room. Agravain called out, announcing their presence, demanding that Lancelot emerge and face justice for his crimes. Inside, the lovers knew their secret was revealed at last. Years of careful deception had collapsed in an instant. Lancelot faced an impossible choice. If he emerged unarmed in his underclothes as he was, he would be taken prisoner, and all. He called out to Agravain, asking for safe passage, offering to submit to justice in the morning when Arthur returned. Agravain refused. The accusations had been made. Lancelot was trapped, and Agravain intended to see him captured or killed. Lancelot then asked that a single knight enter the room, that he might arm himself and fight with some measure of honor. Agravain agreed to this much, perhaps confident that even the great Lancelot could not prevail against a dozen armed knights. Sir Colgrevance volunteered to enter first. The moment he stepped inside, Lancelot attacked, killing him swiftly and stripping his armor and weapons. Now armed, Lancelot threw open the door and charged into the assembled knights. What followed was a massacre. Lancelot cut through them like a farmer harvesting wheat. His rage and desperation gave him strength beyond his normal considerable power. Most of the knights fled. Agravain fought bravely, but fell beneath Lancelot's blade. Mordred, wounded, managed to escape and run to Arthur with news of what had transpired. Arthur returned to find his court in chaos. His greatest knight had been caught in adultery with his queen and had killed a dozen knights in escaping. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Arthur faced a choice he had desperately tried to avoid for years. His heart told him to forgive, to find some way to excuse or overlook the betrayal. But he was not merely a man, he was a king. The laws he had established applied to everyone, including queens and champions. If he failed to enforce those laws, his entire kingdom would lose respect for justice. With great sorrow, Arthur pronounced the sentence required by law. Guinevere was guilty of treason and must be burned at the stake. Guinevere was taken to a field outside Camelot where a great pyre had been constructed. She was bound to a post at its center, and the crowd gathered to witness her execution. Arthur had ordered every knight of the Round Table to attend and stand guard, making this official, making clear that no one was above the law. But Arthur also knew Lancelot, knew his old friend would never allow Guinevere to die. This was not merely an execution. It was a trap, a final confrontation that would decide the fate of everyone involved. Arthur appointed certain knights to stand closest to the pyre, knights he knew Lancelot would be reluctant to kill. Chief among these were Gareth and Gaheris, both sons of King Lot and brothers to Gawain. Gareth especially was dear to Lancelot, for Lancelot had personally trained the young knight, had served as his mentor and friend. Arthur hoped that perhaps the presence of Gareth would make Lancelot hesitate, would force him to reconsider, would break this terrible chain of events before it reached its inevitable conclusion. As the torches were brought forward to light the pyre, Lancelot struck. He came not alone but with a company of his kinsmen and loyal followers, knights who believed in him despite his crimes, or perhaps because of their own ties of blood and friendship. They charged through the crowd, scattering the guards, riding toward Guinevere with absolute determination. Lancelot's sword swung in great arcs, cutting down anyone who stood between him and the queen. He saw only her, saw only his need to save her. He did not see individuals, did not recognize faces. He was a force of nature, unstoppable and terrible. When he reached the pyre, Lancelot killed the executioner, cut Guinevere's bonds, and pulled her onto his horse. Then he turned and fought his way back out through the massing guards. Bodies fell behind him. Blood stained his armor, and among the dead, though Lancelot did not know it yet, were Gareth and Gaheris. They had been standing near the pyre, unarmed as Arthur had commanded, trusting that their presence would prevent violence. They died not even defending themselves, cut down by the very man who had taught them to fight, killed by the knight they had most admired. Lancelot took Guinevere to his own castle, Joyous Gard, a mighty fortress on the northern coast. There they took refuge, surrounded by Lancelot's loyal men. Arthur had no choice now but to bring his full army against them. The king who had once dreamed of perfect justice now had to make war on his greatest knight to enforce that justice. More than that, he had to answer to Sir Gawain, whose brothers had been killed in the rescue. Gawain, who had long been Lancelot's friend, now became his most implacable enemy. Gawain cared nothing for the adultery or the betrayal of Arthur, but the death of his brothers, especially the death of Gareth, whom he had loved dearly, transformed him into a creature of pure vengeance. Arthur laid siege to Joyous Gard with a heavy heart. He commanded his armies to surround the castle, but he could not bring himself to order a full assault. Every day that passed without bloodshed was a day he hoped for some miracle to resolve the situation. But Gawain demanded action, demanded that Lancelot be made to pay for what he had done. The siege dragged on for weeks, then months. Lancelot could have sallied forth and broken the siege with ease, but he would not fight Arthur directly. He had already caused enough damage to the kingdom he loved. Eventually, the Pope himself intervened. Messages arrived from Rome commanding Arthur to take back his queen and to make peace with Lancelot. The church had authority even over kings, and Arthur could not refuse a direct command from the Holy Father. Lancelot agreed to return Guinevere, to restore her to her place as queen, on the condition that she would not be harmed. Arthur agreed to these terms, though Gawain protested bitterly. A day was arranged for the exchange. Lancelot rode to Camelot with 100 knights at his back, bringing Guinevere dressed in royal finery and mounted on a white palfrey. He delivered her to Arthur in full view of the court, and the king received her back with visible relief. But Gawain would not let the matter end there. He challenged Lancelot publicly, calling him a murderer and a traitor, demanding single combat to avenge Gareth and Gaheris. Lancelot refused, explaining that he had not known who he was killing in the chaos of the rescue, that he would never have harmed Gareth intentionally. But Gawain would not accept these explanations. His grief had transformed into hatred, and that hatred needed an outlet. He continued to hurl accusations and challenges until Lancelot, seeing no alternative, agreed to meet him in single combat. The fight took place the next day, with all of Camelot watching. These were two of the greatest warriors in the world, men who had once been close friends, now trying to kill each other. The duel was fierce and lasted for hours. Gawain had a strange power granted to him at birth. His strength increased until noon, making him nearly invincible during the morning hours. But Lancelot endured, defending himself, waiting for noon to pass and Gawain's strength to return to normal. When Gawain's power faded, Lancelot pressed his advantage and struck Gawain down, wounding him severely. But even with Gawain at his mercy, Lancelot would not deliver a killing blow. He had already killed too many men he had once called brothers. He would not add Gawain to that list. He withdrew, asking Arthur's permission to leave Britain entirely, to spare the kingdom further conflict. Arthur, weary and heartbroken, agreed. Lancelot and his followers departed for France, to Lancelot's ancestral lands in Benoic, the kingdom his father had once ruled. But Arthur could not let the matter rest, because Gawain would not let it rest. Gawain's hatred had become the driving force behind Arthur's decisions. The wounded knight demanded that Arthur pursue Lancelot to France, that they make war on him until justice was served. Arthur, torn between his love for Lancelot and his duty to Gawain, made the fateful decision to cross the Channel with his army and besiege Lancelot in his French castle. He left Britain in the care of Mordred, his nephew and perhaps his son from an incestuous union, though this remains disputed in the sources. The war in France was brutal and pointless. Lancelot could have crushed Arthur's forces, but he would not. Every battle ended with Lancelot fighting defensively, refusing to kill Arthur's men if he could avoid it, certainly refusing to harm Arthur himself. Meanwhile, Gawain continued to challenge Lancelot to single combat, driven by his obsessive need for revenge. They fought again, and again Lancelot wounded Gawain, reopening the injury from their first duel. And again Lancelot refused to kill his former friend, hoping that somehow time would heal these terrible wounds. While Arthur was occupied in France, Mordred made his move. He spread rumors that Arthur had died in battle, then claimed the throne for himself. He even attempted to force Guinevere to marry him, to legitimize his claim through her. Guinevere fled to the Tower of London and barricaded herself inside, sending urgent messages to Arthur to return and defend his kingdom. When word of Mordred's betrayal reached Arthur in France, the king had no choice but to abandon his siege of Lancelot and sail back to Britain. A return journey was marked by tragedy upon tragedy. Gawain, still not fully recovered from his wounds, insisted on coming with the army despite his weakness. During the sea crossing, his wounds worsened, infected and festering. By the time they reached the coast of Britain, Gawain was dying. In his final hours, he called for writing materials and composed a letter to Lancelot. With death stripping away his hatred, Gawain could see clearly at last. He wrote that he forgave Lancelot for his brother's deaths, acknowledged that they had died by mischance rather than malice, and begged Lancelot to come to Arthur's aid in the war against Mordred. He signed the letter with a shaking hand and died shortly after, one more friend lost to the catastrophe that had consumed them all. Arthur landed at Dover and immediately engaged Mordred's forces. The battle was fierce, with heavy casualties on both sides, but Arthur's loyal knights pushed Mordred's army back. Yet Arthur knew he did not have the strength to defeat Mordred decisively. His forces were depleted after the French campaign, and many knights who would have fought for him were dead, or had turned traitor, or had simply lost faith in a king who made war on his greatest champion while his kingdom fell to pieces. Arthur needed Lancelot, needed his old friend's sword and leadership. But pride and sorrow kept him from sending for help, and Lancelot's letter, with Gawain's dying plea, had not yet reached France. The armies prepared for a final confrontation on the field of Camlann. The night before the battle, Arthur had a dream where Gawain's ghost appeared to him, warning that if he fought Mordred the next day, both he and Mordred would die, and the kingdom would fall into chaos for generations. Gawain urged Arthur to delay the battle, to wait for Lancelot, who was even now sailing to Britain with an army to help. Arthur awoke shaken and immediately sent messengers to Mordred to arrange a temporary truce. The two armies met between their battle lines, Arthur and Mordred with a small group of knights each, to negotiate terms. They agreed to a month's truce, time enough for Lancelot to arrive and tip the balance decisively against Mordred. But fate intervened in the cruelest way possible. During the negotiations, a knight was bitten by an adder snake. He drew his sword reflexively to kill the serpent. Both armies, seeing a sword drawn during the truce talks, assumed treachery and attacked immediately. The Battle of Camlann began not through anyone's intention, but through the simplest of misunderstandings. The fighting at Camlann was apocalyptic. Knights who had once been brothers in the Fellowship of the Round Table now slaughtered each other without mercy. The field became a sea of blood and corpses. Arthur fought with desperate fury, knowing that everything he had built was crumbling around him. Mordred cut through Arthur's loyal knights with vicious efficiency, determined to claim the throne by force since he had failed to take it by treachery. As the day wore on, the casualties mounted until almost no one remained standing on either side. Finally, as sunset approached, Arthur and Mordred faced each other across a field of the dead. All their knights had fallen. They were the last two standing, father and son, or uncle and nephew, depending on which tale you believe, both covered in blood and wounds, both knowing this was the end. Arthur gathered his remaining strength and charged at Mordred, driving his spear through the traitor's body. But Mordred, even as the spear impaled him, pulled himself along the shaft until he was close enough to strike Arthur with his sword, dealing the king a mortal blow to the head. They fell together, and Britain's greatest king and its greatest traitor died within moments of each other. Sir Bedivere, one of the few survivors of Camlann, carried the dying Arthur to a nearby chapel. Arthur commanded Bedivere to take Excalibur and throw it into a nearby lake, to return the sword to the Lady of the Lake, who had given it to him so many years ago. Bedivere obeyed, and a hand emerged from the water to catch the sword and pull it beneath the surface. Then a boat appeared carrying 3 queens, and they took Arthur's body and sailed away to Avalon, the mystical island where, some say, Arthur sleeps still, waiting to return when Britain needs him most. When Lancelot finally arrived in Britain with his army, sailing as fast as the winds would carry him after receiving Gawain's letter, he found only devastation. The Battle of Camlann had already been fought. Arthur was gone. The Round Table was destroyed. The Fellowship of Knights had been annihilated. He had arrived too late to save anything or anyone. The guilt that had haunted Lancelot for years now became absolute and crushing. If he had not loved Guinevere, none of this would have happened. If he had not killed Gareth and Gaheris, Gawain would not have forced Arthur to war. If he had swallowed his pride and returned to help Arthur sooner, Camlann might have been prevented. The destruction of Camelot was his fault, and he knew it. Lancelot traveled to find Guinevere, hoping perhaps that they could finally be together now that Arthur was gone, now that there was no one left to betray. He found her at Amesbury, in a convent where she had taken refuge. But the Guinevere he found was not the woman he had loved. Grief and guilt had transformed her as thoroughly as they had transformed him. She had devoted herself to God, seeking redemption for her sins. When Lancelot arrived, she refused to see him. She sent a message telling him that their love had destroyed the greatest kingdom the world had ever known, that thousands had died because of their selfish passion. She commanded him to leave and never return, to seek his own salvation through penance and prayer. Lancelot staggered away from Amesbury as if physically struck. The woman for whom he had sacrificed everything, for whom he had betrayed his king and destroyed his honor, now rejected him utterly. He wandered for a time, lost and purposeless. Eventually, he found himself at a monastery at Glastonbury. The monks there offered him shelter, and gradually, Lancelot found a different kind of purpose. He became a hermit, devoted to prayer and penance. He fasted until his magnificent body wasted away. He prayed until his knees were permanently damaged. He subjected himself to every mortification, trying through physical suffering to balance out the spiritual damage he had caused. The former greatest knight in the world spent his final years as the humblest of monks, performing the most menial tasks, sleeping on stone floors, eating the simplest foods. When word reached him that Guinevere had died after years of devoted religious service, Lancelot made one final journey to Amesbury. He found her body laid out in state and broke down completely, weeping over the corpse of the woman who had been the center of his entire existence. He carried her body back to Camelot and buried her beside Arthur, placing the queen with the king at last, in death achieving the proper union that should have been maintained in life. After Guinevere's burial, Lancelot returned to Glastonbury and declined rapidly. He was perhaps 60 years old, but he looked ancient, worn down by guilt and penance and heartbreak. 6 weeks after Guinevere's death, Lancelot died in his sleep. The monks who had lived with him reported that in his final days, he seemed to be at peace for the first time in decades. His body was taken to Joyous Gard and buried there in the castle that had been his refuge and his stronghold. His tombstone bore a simple inscription acknowledging him as the greatest knight who ever lived. But that inscription could not capture the tragedy of what he had been or what he had lost. The story of Lancelot has resonated through the centuries because it speaks to fundamental truths about human nature. Here was a man who wanted to be perfect, who tried with all his considerable strength to embody every ideal, yet who found that wanting to be perfect and actually being perfect are two entirely different things. His tragedy was not that he was weak or cowardly or evil. His tragedy was that he was human, subject to the same passions and failings that afflict us all, but held to impossible standards because of his extraordinary gifts. Lancelot's love for Guinevere could be seen as the noblest of emotions or the basest of betrayals, depending on your perspective. Medieval poets writing about courtly love celebrated such passions as the highest form of devotion. But the same medieval world that celebrated courtly love also recognized it as fundamentally transgressive, as a beautiful poison that destroyed as surely as it elevated. Lancelot and Guinevere's affair embodied this contradiction. Their love was genuine, profound, transformative. It was also selfish, destructive, and ultimately catastrophic. The question of whether Lancelot bears responsibility for Camelot's fall admits no simple answer. Yes, his affair with Guinevere set events in motion that led to the kingdom's destruction, but others made choices too. Arthur chose to ignore the affair for years, then chose to punish it when he could no longer pretend. Mordred chose treachery and rebellion. Agravain chose to force a confrontation. Gawain chose vengeance over forgiveness. Every character in this tragedy had agency, had moments where different choices might have led to different outcomes. To blame Lancelot alone would be to oversimplify a story whose power lies precisely in its complexity. What we can say with certainty is that Lancelot represents the gap between aspiration and achievement that haunts all human endeavor. Camelot itself was built on this gap, on the dream that humans could create perfect justice, perfect fellowship, perfect governance. The Round Table was supposed to eliminate hierarchy and create equality among warriors. The chivalric code was supposed to channel masculine violence into protecting the weak. Arthur's laws were supposed to apply equally to everyone. But these were ideals imposed on flawed human beings, and flawed human beings inevitably fell short. Lancelot's failure was Camelot's failure writ small, the failure of idealism to account for the reality of the human heart. In the end, Lancelot's story is about the price of love and the cost of honor when the two come into conflict. It asks whether it is better to betray your king or betray your heart, and suggests that perhaps there are situations where any choice is a betrayal of something essential. It reminds us that greatness in one area does not guarantee goodness in all areas, that the strongest warrior can be weak in the face of emotion, that the most loyal friend can be the deepest traitor. These contradictions made Lancelot human, and his humanity made him tragic, and his tragedy has ensured that his name endures long after the names of genuinely virtuous but less interesting knights have been forgotten. The greatest knight who ever lived was also the most flawed, and therein lies the eternal fascination of his tale. If this exploration of Lancelot's tragic story resonated with you, consider subscribing to History Scrolls English for more deep dives into legendary figures and mythological tales. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this journey through the rise and fall of Camelot's greatest champion, and let me know in the comments which legendary figure you'd like us to explore next. Until next time, remember that even heroes carry the weight of their choices, and sometimes the greatest strength is found not in never falling, but in how we rise after we've fallen.